Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to Talent Optimization. And today we are going to talk about how we attract and retain staff into our organizations. However, we have a fun little twist on this. We're going to talk about data and how we really utilize data in order to attract and retain staff. And let me tell you, data can be used in so many different ways. And the data will always tell the story as long as you don't skew it. So I have an amazing guest with me today. Rashad Nelms is joining me from a number of different places, actually, but he is currently the executive in residence at Indiana University. And one of the things that Rashad brings with him is working with United Nations over several different years. And I will let him tell you that story. And then we're going to dig into data and how we can use it to really make amazing impacts inside of our organizations.
Well, thanks, Tracy, for the introduction. And thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being here. Love the podcast, love the work that you're doing and the insight that you're sharing with your audience. So please keep it up. As you mentioned, I'm currently working as one of several executive in residence with Indiana University, specifically the Office of the Vice President for Diversity and Equity and Multicultural Affairs. And in addition to that, I work with several other institutional clients throughout the world. And then I'm currently on sabbatical for the United Nations World Food Program, where I've served for 17 years and in more than 20 countries. So it's been a pretty fascinating professional arc that hopefully we can discuss as we talk about data.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, because you've played in the HR realm, you've played in some executive coaching realms. Mm-hmm. How has data been used both harmfully and helpfully for employees in the organizations that you've worked in?
Data has been great in the sense that it can give you insight when used correctly and strategically into where the problem areas are or where there's some opportunities for strengthening, right? So for instance, it can reveal where there's some inadequacies in terms of hiring processes. Why aren't we getting enough people of color into mid-manager and senior executive positions, for instance? Or why is it that we are able to get pools of high quality individuals into the applicant pool, but then we're not selecting them, right? So it can be incredibly useful for uncovering those kind of things. The downside is that, as you mentioned, people can skew data to fit their narrative, right? Without fully appreciating the nuances, right? Mm-hmm. So a person might say, well, we don't get enough of XYZ candidates, and it's because there's just not enough people. It's like, that's one way of looking at the data. We could dig deeper and we can explore, did you reach out, for instance, to historically Black colleges and universities to see if there are talented individuals there? Did you look at sororities and fraternities? Did you look at people, in other words, beyond your immediate vicinity or your network? And
that's
the data was, it's totally uncomfortable, totally uncomfortable. However, for those HR officials and senior executives in particular who are committed to their organization or institution success, it's incumbent that they do that. Yeah. Because that's the only way that we're going to get the best out of the best.
Absolutely. And when we look at this, let's just talk about recruiting here for a second. When we look at that, so much of it is outreach. And we know that the number one source of hires inside of our organization is our own staff, right? Mm-hmm. And knowing that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it also means that, hey, if we know that we want to attract a different group of individuals, then guess what? We have to consciously make certain choices as to what that is. And,
exactly.
You mentioned one, which is reaching out into whether it's historically Black colleges and universities, whether it is different demographic groups. One of the things that we, learned at an organization that I had worked at, we had found that we were serving almost 80% minority populations, but yet guess what? About 80% of the staff were Caucasian, so they were non-minority. And so when you look at that, it was, okay, so what do we want to do here? We're recruiting individuals and we're clearly not recruiting from the right pockets. And so I started asking our clients, where should I go recruit? And their responses, I loved. So their responses were, Tracy, you need to go create really strong relationships with the African-American churches in town. And you need to build the like, no trust, right? And then the other was from our Hispanic staff. They said, hey, Tracy, actually Mexican grocery stores. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, because it's very, very community-based. Go post things there. I'm like, okay. So we did that. And we started to see a shift in the applicants that were coming in, right? So it's not just, hey, we're not getting it. It's where are you going to do it? And then, putting some things in place. So for example, our listeners know predictive index, right? So using some things like predictive index to say, hey, we are going to bring in and do an interview with every single person that has a match score of a 7 or above on the predictive index. And if you don't know what this is, I will have a predictive index link that's, in the show notes that you can click on and we can chat more about this. However, but naming and saying, no matter what, if there's a match score of 7 or above to a position, we're going to interview you no matter what, allows us to take that bias out of it because it's fit to roll then.
Exactly. And what I love about everything that you said, one of the things I loved the most was that it went beyond an individual effort and it was institutionalized. And so the trigger was, if there was a 7 or higher, then this response would occur. And it is not necessarily left up to an individual, whether it's a manager, HR, whomever, to make the determination. And so that means that anytime that an applicant hit that score, the response was triggered, which I think is critical. Critical.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing we did is we went beyond our current staff to recruit. And that was something that I think was really important. So when we look at data, it's not just saying, hey, you know what, we're not bringing in as many applicants. It's also looking at data to say, are we bringing in higher quality applicants?
And then using that same data to determine how can we put them, once they're selected, into places where they will succeed, or how can we get the most out of them? Right. Because what we may find is that whether it's assigning a mentor, whether it is a training program, there's not going to be a panacea or one size fits solution. However, you can use that data to figure out, okay, so the individual that we brought in is really great in writing, or maybe they're not. And so we can supplement that with a writing training, or maybe their long-term aspirations, professional aspirations are to become a senior executive. So maybe we connect them with a mentor who has a similar route, right? But you got to use data.
Yeah. And this gets really to that retention piece, right? Which is, what does that individual want? What are those talent pathways inside your organization? Are you making them known, right? So often as organizations, we have these great talent pathways in our head, but we don't tell the person that they're on it.
Exactly.
Or that there is one.
Exactly. Or that there is one. And then, like you said, like we've I think opined, is that how do we make sure that those tracks or that those processes are as accessible, right, as possible to different groups?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. And guess what? For those of you out there going, man, we don't collect any of this data. It's not here. It's there. You may just need to dig it and actually go pull it out. So, story here, in this organization, one of the things, so we were in a 3-year cultural competency kind of journey, essentially. And one of the things that we looked at was, we're not really promoting, minorities. And why is that? So I sat down and I started digging through all of the interview notes and figuring out why, right? So the data's there. It may just be hard to uncover. So I'll just name that, right? And really figuring out, why were we not promoting individuals? And what we found out were 2 key things. And when I tell you the answer to this, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's so easy. But we didn't see it, right? So much of this is, are you willing to see the answer that's right in front of you? And so one of them was, what we, for so many of these positions, didn't feel that these individuals had the writing or the speaking skills to be in manager or leadership positions. And then the second thing was that there was a lack of technology, the lack of using Excel or the lack of using Word. And then I'm like, actually, but these could be pretty easy fixes. They have the drive, they have the passion, they have the connections, they have the knowledge. These are just things that, hey, it's like taking a stone and like, buffering it a little bit to get it to where we want it to go. So we connected with our local technical college and we brought in some training. And, I just kind of went around and tapped folks on the shoulder and said, hey, we've got this training. Do you want to do it? I think you should. Right. And our numbers shifted after that. But it's using the data to say what's happening here. And, really paying close attention to it. Look at your turnover data. It's so telling, but don't just look at what's on the surface, really look at what's underneath it.
Exactly. And, it could be looking at turnover data, is also looking at, perhaps conducting exit interviews, is looking at interviewing or speaking with individuals who didn't necessarily meet the threshold and figuring out, okay, what are some of the issues there? Are there some trends that we notice? And I would say perhaps I can say more importantly, but I think for your listeners, particularly those who are in formal positions of leadership who can effectuate this institutional change that we're discussing, there has to be a commitment, right? And I think that's what you and others within that institution showed, right? And we need more of that.
Right. And we had a great leader. Like, I won't take credit for this because it was not me that did this, right? I followed the leader.
Right. But you just as easily could have been a thorn in the side. You could have created a set of obstacles, but you didn't. Right. And so it really flows down. Then it starts at the top and it continues to spread throughout an institution, but it has to start at the top.
Right. And I think the other thing with data and with what you just stated, you have to be curious about it.
Yes.
I'm so curious about what these numbers are telling me, because that's going to lead to the creativity and to those things that are right in front of you going, oh, I now see it. Right.
Exactly.
So, but what I was curious about is, you've worked around the world with United Nations and people are people. And I'm so curious about, how you've used data to really further individuals meeting their personal goals, but also businesses meeting their business objectives.
The way I've done it has not necessarily used formal data. It's been personal observations, right? And discussions for me to realize that, let's say if I'm dealing with someone from a specific country or a region of the world, that they may respond more quickly to a one-on-one conversation, right? In which I'm able to glean from them, what are your aspirations? Right. And then I can figure out, can you send me a writing sample so I can determine how good of a writer you are? Or can you tell me a little bit about your network? And through that one-on-one discussion, it's less embarrassing, it's on their terms, it's consistent with whatever the cultural norms may be for that individual. I can then leverage my expertise to assist them, right? Whereas in other instances, it might be doing something as simple as recognizing them in front of their colleagues. Right, that can be enough to light that fire that then continues throughout their nascent career. Right, so those are just a few of the ways, but it all started with me paying attention, right, and also paying attention to what I was feeling to say, I feel like something's off. I can't put my finger on it. Let me test out that hypothesis. Let me go and ask, or let me look at the performance reviews. Let me verify the accuracy of that hypothesis, and then from there, making a calculated decision on how I was going to approach and engage.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things with data that we don't always think about is we have to ask, right?
Yes.
We have to ask in order to collect that. And one of the things that we have done is, for ourselves, for our clients, whatever, is when someone's hired, we actually have them fill out a new hire questionnaire, which is as silly as, what beverage do you like to drink during the workday? You have to add during the workday onto that conversation.
Exactly.
Because otherwise you might get vodka in the middle of the workday, right? And may or may not be appropriate. However, but then what's your favorite snack? Into, why did you choose our organization? And, what is your goal in the first 3 months in the first year? And then, using a slightly different questionnaire, it's really about them. We do a lot of check-ins with, climate surveys and exit interviews and stay interviews. Are you consistently collecting data on your staff that's really about their goals and that alignment with the goals of the organization?
Exactly. And to kind of piggyback off that is also asking questions of, when are they at their best?
Yeah.
Right? What does that look like? Is it when they're working by themselves? Is it when they're working on a single piece of a project? Is it morning? Is it afternoon? In other words, that's the future, I think, of employment, particularly globally. It's going to be much more about creating or tailoring experiences to our employees. And so the institutions that can do that more quickly and more effectively will arguably be more profitable and be more sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we kind of start to land the plane here with this, what's the key takeaway that you have for executives listening into our conversation today?
I would say in order to leverage data, there has to be a commitment. That's number one. That'll probably be the main takeaway. And then number two, or part two of that is going to feel uncomfortable, because it is uncomfortable, right? You are proactively challenging long-held assumptions, challenging long-held behaviors, and is going to feel uncomfortable, because it also means that that equilibrium that you've known for so much of your life is suddenly thrown into disarray. And so it's going to be incumbent upon that leader to figure out ways to create a new kind of stability, but one where you're leveraging data to get the most out of your personnel.
Absolutely. And then what would your key takeaway be for our HR professionals listening in today?
I would say that within reason, right? Question and analyze, pay closer attention to the systems and the processes that you have in place, right? Because they are reflections of the biases, both unconscious as well as conscious, that we bring to bear. And so if you really want data to be used effectively, you've got to look at what already exists. How are the systems set up to figure out where there might be opportunities to collect data, to identify the type of data that you want to collect, the frequency. Look at your systems and your processes, right?
Absolutely. So I have a question. Is it data or is it data? Because
exactly. I don't know. I wish I knew the answer.
Awesome. So as we're chatting today, I'm like, I keep saying data and you keep saying data. And I'm like, I don't know which one's right. Whatever.
Exactly. Potato.
So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you are curious about Rashad, I have his information in the show notes. And, we do have a keynote here at Elevated Talent Consulting on, how to use data to create powerhouse teams, really kind of talking about this specific topic. And so we can't wait to chat with you next week. And with that, thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.